The first few minutes of riding through the blowing snow had sobered up most of the posse. A few were still blissfully intoxicated and were oblivious to the bitter cold winds that lashed at their faces like 1,000 needles. They had gathered their gear, saddled up their horses, and were now slowly riding out of town, following the only road that the town possessed. It was still dark out, although the sky was starting to lighten with the promise of dawn. The judge rode at the head of the column, his snow-white horse snorting and kicking up snow as they plodded forward. Big Dole rode directly behind the judge, deciding to join the posse for no other reason other than the 50 sovereigns the judge had promised. Dole sat astride a sturdy-looking brown mule with one lop ear and a thick, shaggy coat. The mule was named Daisy, and she was the only animal Dole kept for a mount. She had carried him from New Corwick to the frontier and back again several times without fail, and he trusted her. She had been his only possession when he had first rode into Saber-Tooth after failing to strike it rich panning for gold in the rivers further north. Big Dole had had more luck in town and quickly earned a small fortune from winning dice and playing poker. He was not a very wealthy man, but he had enough to live comfortably. He could have easily replaced Daisy with a proper riding horse, but he had decided never to sell his old mount. He kept her mostly for sentimental reasons. The mule was extremely tough, strong, and very sure-footed, a quality that was useful for surviving the harsh frontier climate. Daisy had proved herself a reliable mount and loyal companion many times. The judge's own white stallion, on the other hand, was a different story. His expensive mount was more suited for the paved streets and well-ordered parks of a large city rather than the wild and rough frontier. The judge's stallion, which had a name that Dole couldn't pronounce, was clearly struggling with the difficult conditions. Its white mane was caked with snow, and its eyes were squinted and half-closed against the icy wind. It whinnied and snorted in protest as it trudged along through the snow, its nostrils flaring with each heaving breath. Big Dole watched the judge's horse with a mixture of amusement and pity. He knew that the stallion would not last long. The judge's horse had already been exhausted when it arrived in Saber-Tooth. It had barely managed to recover its strength during its brief stay in the town's stable. Now it was once again being pushed beyond its limits. Big Dole wondered just how long the poor beast would last. The judge didn't seem to care, or maybe he was just ignorant. It was not likely that the expensive and pampered stallion would survive for more than a few days, if that. Big Dole felt sorry for the horse, but he could not deny that the judge was a fool for bringing the stallion out here in the first place. If the judge had only listened to him earlier and had left the horse behind. There had been plenty of sturdy little frontier ponies at the livery stable that would have suited his purpose much better. But the judge had insisted on keeping his horse, and now the poor beast would likely freeze or break its legs in a ditch. The bulk of the posse were just behind the judge and the barkeep. 40 men rode in a haphazard formation, loosely grouped into a single column. 10 men had ridden on ahead to scout out any signs left by the impostor and Pike's trail. It was unlikely that they would find anything. The storm hadn't let up since the pair had left town, and had obliterated nearly every trace of their passing. The only thing they could hope to find was some evidence that the two had passed by, such as a broken tree branch or a snagged piece of clothing. That is, if the wind and snow didn't cover it up. To make matters worse, they had not even left the main road yet. "Hey, Dole," a man called out from further back. "Yeah?" Big Dole replied without turning his head. "Is it true that the other guy we're hunting is a Yarkie?" the man asked. "What if he is?" Dole grunted. "Well, I just wanted to know if I should go back and grab my big elephant gun," the man replied, "just in case we run into him, and he's got one of those big, hairy brutes with him." It was the judge who answered before Big Dole could. "The man we're looking for isn't a Yarkie," he called back over his shoulder. "He may have lived among them for a while, but he's no true Madok man. He's nothing more than a savage-loving renegade bent on killing." There will be no woolly mammoths on this expedition, not unless we happen to run into a wild herd. That's not likely, Big Dole added. Ain't none around these parts since the end of the panic. The herds were all either killed by us or driven north by the Yarkies trying to save 'em. And before you ask, no. There ain't no Yarkie bands in these parts, not anymore. Last time one was spotted around here was years ago, before the panic started. Are you certain of that? The judge asked. Yup, Big Dole said. The tribes have kept their distance from the settlement since the war ended. The barkeep paused, his eyes growing distant as he gazed into space. We really taught 'em to fear us, didn't we? He said after a long silence had passed. There was a slight tinge of sadness in his voice. The judge noticed it and scowled disapprovingly at him. You pity those savages, don't you? The judge asked. Not all the Yarkies were bad ones, Big Dole replied. Don't get me wrong, a lot of them were as bad as could be. That Chief Kotha, for example, he was as evil as sin and as spiteful as a swarm of angry bees. But some of them were somewhat good folks. Big Dole was silent again for a moment before speaking. You know, I once met a Yarkie who helped me out when I was in a tight spot. Actually, he saved my life. Really? The judge said, turning his head to look back at the barkeep. And how did a Yarkie end up saving the life of a frontiersman? Well, that's quite the story, Big Dole replied. You see, back when I was panning for gold, I went to this small creek called the White Fang to see if I could find any traces of gold there. I'd been told that there were supposed to be deposits along the banks, so I went to see if I could strike it rich. Well, turns out someone must have lied or been mistaken, because there wasn't so much as a single flake of gold dust anywhere along the whole length of that damned river. I wasted 3 months panning away for nothing. Anyway, I tried panning one last time out of desperation and had just about given up when I noticed something moving downstream towards me. It was a huge bear, not a black or a grizzly, but one of those giant short-faced ones with the long legs and big claws. It was massive, must have been 15 feet tall when it stood up straight. 15 feet, I tell you. Well, things were already looking grim for me. What with that thing being less than 100 feet from me and me being unarmed, I'd stupidly left my shotgun in my camp. I was already in a heap of trouble. But then I see the 3 cubs that were following this sow, and I knew that I was deep in the proverbial manure pile. I had been squatting down by the water's edge when I'd seen her, and I was scared of standing up, thinking she hadn't noticed me yet. So I started shimmying backwards on my hunches to stay low and get out of there without her seeing me. But she must have heard or smelled something, 'cause the next thing I know, she's charging at me. 50 feet, 30 feet, 10 feet, and then bam, the bear slams into me nose first, and I'm sent flying clear across the creek and into the cattails and reeds on the other side. I was badly shook up, but not dead yet, thank heaven. Anyways, Mama Bear comes thundering through the water towards me, and I'm still laying stunned from the impact. She's just about on me when I suddenly hear the loudest screaming, trumpeting, bellowing sound that I'd ever heard in all my life. Bear stops dead in her tracks, rears up in the middle of the water, and starts roaring at whatever it was that made the noise. Next thing I know, this giant woolly mammoth comes out of nowhere and starts bellowing at the bear. Mama Bear takes one look at the mammoth and then bolts away, with her cubs trailing after her as fast as they can. I'm still rattled beyond belief, and I'm laying there on the bank staring up at the mammoth when I see that there was a Yarkie riding on its back. A real live, honest-to-goodness Yarkie, complete with fur clothes, painted face, and flint-tipped spear. After a minute, he hops off the mammoth and runs over to me. By this point I was shaking like a leaf and was half convinced that I was about to be scalped by this savage. The Yarkie kneels down next to me and starts speaking to me in his own language. I don't understand a word of what he says, but he starts examining me to see if I'm injured. Turns out I had a broken rib from being slammed by that bear. After a few minutes the pain starts to kick in and I'm gasping like a fish out of water. I must have blacked out, and 'cause I remember waking up on this sort of makeshift bed made of branches, leaves and pelts. My shirt was off, and my chest was bandaged and wrapped in some weird-smelling poultice. I never knew what it was made of, but it stank something fierce. I was sweating bullets and burning up from fever. The Yaqui was sitting next to me and gave me something to drink that knocked me out again. The next time I woke up, the pain had gone, and the fever had broken. I was a bit groggy, and my mouth felt like sandpaper, but otherwise I was feeling fine. I sat up and realized that I was in my own tent, and that the Yaqui and his mammoth were both gone. "Did you ever find out who this Yaqui was?" the judge asked. "Nope," Big Dole replied. "He only spoke his own lingo, and I couldn't understand a word of it. Never saw him again after he left. All I know is that he saved my life from that bear and then nursed me back to health, even though I was a total stranger to him. I've often wondered who he was and what became of him." "Perhaps he's dead now," the judge said coldly. "Thousands of the savages were put down during the war." "I hope not," Big Dole said under his breath. Movement up ahead caught his attention. Big Dole looked up to see the 10 men who had gone to scout ahead, riding through the snow towards the main posse. The horses trudged through the deep snow, their nostrils flaring and steaming in the cold air. The lead scout, who was known as Red due to his long ginger hair and beard, rode up to the judge with an excited look on his face. "We got 'em!" he cried wildly. "You've caught them!" Judge Hogan exclaimed. "Where are they?" "I mean, we got their trail," Red said, correcting himself. "The boys and I found their tracks up a ways, over the next hill." "You're sure that it is their trail?" the judge asked. "Yes, sir, Mr. Hogan, sir," replied Red. "We found a piece of Gus's old hat caught on a tree branch." "You mean you found a piece of John T. Pike's hat?" the judge said. "Me, John, Gus don't make no difference to me. I never liked him," Red said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Anyway, the boys and I found the start of their trail." "Then let's get after them," cried the judge as he spurred his horse into a gallop. The white thoroughbred whinnied in protest and trudged through the snow as fast as it could. The rest of the posse followed, each man excited at the thought of finally capturing their quarry. Red and the other scouts were the first to reach the top of the hill. It was a steep rise that was covered with trees, which were blanketed in thick layers of heavy snow. When they reached the brow of the hill, the scouts pointed to the tree branch that held a piece of John T. Pike's old hat. The judge rode up and plucked the torn piece of leather from the tree. He examined it closely before turning to speak to Big Dole. "This has been left behind deliberately," he said. "Look at the tree branch it was stuck on. It's not broken off naturally. It's been sharpened to a point with a knife." Big Dole and the other posse members looked and saw that the judge was correct. The end of the branch had indeed been whittled to a long, sharp point. "Joe wants us to follow him," the judge said in a low voice. "He wants us to come after him, and he wants to be able to follow him easily." The judge turned in his saddle towards the posses and looked them over. He knew that some of them had probably seen their share of fighting during the Great Panic, but most were either out of practice or had never seen anything other than a couple of drunks slugging each other in the streets. He found himself wishing that he had brought along his bodyguards from New Corwick. They were all ex-Legion troops who could be relied upon in a fight. It was true that they were ex-colonial Salvic legionnaires rather than Imperial Soolian troops, but they were still experienced veterans who would not balk at a fight. Judge Hogan rebuked himself for not bringing them along. If only he hadn't been so eager to get to Saber-Tooth. If only he had had the sense to see that the telegrams offering him a partnership in a business venture was a ruse. If only he had listened to his instincts that something was wrong when he first received the telegrams. There was no use regretting the past now. All the judge could do was try and make up for his earlier mistake. He looked back at the men who had followed him out of Saber-Tooth. He drew himself up in his saddle. His face became stern and grim. "You men better keep your heads on a swivel and your fingers on the triggers," he said in a cold, hard voice. "This Beaver-Killin Joe is more than likely lying in wait for us, just waiting for us to catch up to him. Be prepared for anything and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what sort of surprises Joe might have in store for us." The men nodded grimly as the judge turned his horse around. He was about to ride away from the tree when he noticed that something had been carved into the trunk. The judge looked closely and saw that there were several runes and symbols etched into the bark. He studied them for a moment, recognizing them as belonging to the Yarki language. They were crude, simple, and inelegant, like the people who used them. The judge couldn't understand them at all. "Anyone here speak Yarki?" he called out, turning around to look at his men. A few of the scouts raised their hands. "Can any of you tell me what that is supposed to mean?" the judge asked, pointing to the symbols on the tree. One of the scouts, a man known as Shorty, rode up beside him and examined the carved markings for a moment. He then turned towards the judge, a serious look on his face. "What is it?" the judge said, a feeling of dread in the pit of his stomach. "This is very unexpected," Shorty said, scratching his chin and thinking. "No one I know of has seen writing like this since the panic." "So, you're saying you don't know what it means?" "No, I can read it just fine," said Shorty. "It's just, well, I better give you a little crash course about the Yarkis and their culture." "What?" the judge asked. "Now is not the time for a lecture, man." "Look," said Shorty, "this is important. Each Yarki tribe has its own written lingo, each distinct and unique from the others." "Well, what about it?" the judge growled irritably. "These markings right here, they're the ones used by the Oknalaga tribe," said Shorty, as if that explained everything. "What of it?" asked the judge, clearly irritated now. "The Oknalaga tribe was wiped out at the start of the Great Panic," said Shorty. "They were the tribe that got wiped out on the banks of the Black River. They were all killed, to the last man, woman, child, everyone." The judge's eyes narrowed. "If that's true, then how can these markings exist? You said that no one has seen their like for years." "Clearly this Beaver-Killin Joe guy must have picked up the lingo while the tribe was still alive," Shorty explained. "That explains what these markings mean right here." The judge looked back at the words again. "What does it say?" "It says, 'I seek revenge. I seek he who murders the helpless. I seek he who cowers in fear. I seek he who has no honor. I seek justice. Come and get me.'" The judge felt his face grow cold. "This is no mere warning," he said darkly. "This is a challenge." The judge turned and glared at the men, his face a mask of fury. His eyes blazed with righteous indignation. "I accept this challenge," he roared. "Let this Beaver-Killin Joe rue the day he ever thought of defying Imperial Justice. He's about to learn why I earned the nickname Hangman Hogan. Come on, boys. We've got an outlaw and a renegade to string up." The men cheered as Judge Hogan wheeled his horse around in the direction the tracks led. The stallion snorted and reared, throwing his rider off into the snow. The posse's cheers died instantly as the men looked on in shock and disbelief. The judge's face turned beet red as he pushed himself to his feet covered in snow. The white stallion had had enough of the harsh conditions and had decided that it would go no further. It stood with its head held low to the ground, its sides heaving as it panted. Its legs were trembling and its eyes were dull. It was clear that the poor beast had been pushed beyond its limits. "Damnable brute," Judge Hogan growled. "I told you that horse wouldn't last long out here," Big Doll muttered, "especially not in these conditions." The white stallion snorted as it slowly lowered itself onto its knees. It let out a weary sigh and then closed its eyes. It lay there, its sides still heaving as its strength failed. Judge Hogan stood over the horse, a look of disappointment mixed with disgust on his face. "That there animal is done for sure," one of the men said. "It won't last another hour." "Better put it out of its misery, Mr. Hogan, sir," another man said. "A shame," the judge said, his voice flat and emotionless. "It was a fine specimen when I first bought him." He walked over to the horse, drawing out his small pistol. He knelt next to the white stallion and pressed the muzzle of the gun against its head. The horse made no move as the judge squeezed the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed across the frozen landscape, sending a flock of snowbirds fluttering away. The judge stood back up, a grim look on his face. "I'm going to have to ride double with someone now," he said. "I'm sure Daisy can carry both of us just fine," Big Dole said, as he rode up beside the judge. The mule gave a long, loud bray, as if agreeing with the barkeep. The judge scowled at the animal before climbing up onto its back, sitting behind Big Dole. The mule grunted and then set off at a slow trot. "Mr. Red, Mr. Shorty," the judge called out, "you two will go ahead and see where the tracks lead. The rest of us will follow you. If you run into our quarry, do not engage them. Wait for the rest of us before taking any action." Red and Shorty nodded and then rode off towards the crest of the hill. The rest of the posse waited until the pair had ridden out of sight before riding after them. The snowflakes continued to fall, burying the dead stallion under a blanket of white. Soon, nothing was left but a large pile of snow. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound. It was quiet. Far too quiet. Then suddenly a rider appeared from among the snow-laden trees further up the ridge. He was 100 yards away from where the judge had been standing. The man, who was dressed in a buffalo-skin coat and a suit of buckskins, had watched the posse from the cover of the forest. He had seen and heard everything. He rode up to the spot where the men had been moments before and stopped. He looked down at the dead horse and then up the trail. The hoofprints of the posse were already being filled in by the falling snow, but it was still an easy trail to follow. A smirk tugged at the rider's lips. His Appaloosa nickered quietly and pawed at the snow. He stroked the horse's neck as he continued to gaze at the path. "Easy, Leo, easy," he murmured. "We'll go somewhere warm and dry when this is all over, but I'm just going to have a little fun with them first before that." The Appaloosa stallion tossed his head, his dark brown mane flapping in the wind. Beaver-Killin Joe laughed softly and then nudged the horse into motion. They turned back towards the snow-laden trees and headed up the slope, towards the ridge where the posse would soon be arriving. A look of glee and anticipation lit his face. He licked his lips, and a savage grin spread across his mouth. His one good eye shone with a dark hunger, a hunger for revenge, and a desire to finally end his hated foe. He urged his mount onward and up the steep incline. It wouldn't be long now. Not long at all.